thank you everybody for having me. I'm a developer at Airbnb. My team is developer platform. I build tools for engineers. You might use Mockito that I built years ago. But I not only build tools, I also predict what is going to move the needle the most for developers, right? This is really important because we want developer platform team at Airbnb to work on the most important things that can really move the needle for developers, for our developers. And this is the survey question that we ask our developers every 6 months. In the previous survey, they told us that, hey, ephemeral developer environments is the best thing ever. I have remote ID, I can develop so much faster. Now, in the next few months, where we're going to run this survey again, we're going to hear all the rave about AI and how it can assist engineering. So this talk is about that, how we will make that future a reality at Airbnb and what have we done so far. And of course, surveys just a sliver of holistic developer experience. So I'm not going to get to all those details. Check out Christopher Sanson, who is my colleague on developer platform. He has a talk tomorrow on how we approach holistic developer experience at Airbnb. But let's get back to AI and the Simpsons fans. Yeah, so we are embracing our AI overlords, and we should, because they can help us with a lot of things. At Airbnb, we have divided that space, like AI-assisted engineering, into those three main categories. One is ChatGPT, which is basically giving access to engineers to those really powerful, modern, large language models. And it's not only for engineers, this is for all employees, of course. There's GitHub Copilot, but I'm sure like everybody tried, like you are at the developer productivity conference, I'm sure everybody has, but any one of you tried already Copilot. It's interesting, it's your favorite IDE plugin that predicts what you're about to code so that you save on boilerplate code and you can go faster. So I'll talk about that and what we do with Copilot. And finally, the third category, which is my personal favorite, is how you yourself can innovate, build new ideas, integrate with those generative AIs and prosper and build something that is great for either engineers or for other like product flows you have in your organization. So let's start with ChatGPT first. And first the question, how long do you think it took between GPT-3 and GPT-4? You know? Who knows? 1, 2, 6. Okay, that's the so it's been 3 years. The point I'm trying to make is that this space is really moving fast, right? We somewhat know what we're doing, right? And I'm not an expert. You're probably not an expert either. And we're like figuring it out as we go. Definitely an area of like high value, potential value for engineering productivity. Let's dive into some of the use cases that we see at Airbnb. So engineers at Airbnb would use ChatGPT for coding. They would ask, this is especially useful if you're not super familiar with a given language, you want to contribute to another repository that is, let's say, Golang, and you may are a Java developer, right? So with those use cases, this is perfect. Also for any kinds of like boilerplate code, repetitive code, or scripting. Scripts also are great. If you have a script that has very clear inputs and outputs, tell ChatGPT to generate that script for you. Writing tests is an interesting use case, and I don't know what to think about it because like years ago, I spent years on building like ergonomics of Mockito so that it's like super convenient to write like mocks in Java. And now you can sort of generate your tests with ChatGPT, which is interesting. Some developers use it for specific like domains. It's not like great for like everything, but we've seen that pattern, that use case. Another one is refactoring. Refactoring is not something that can do significant refactoring, where you have some major complexity, you want to break it down into different modules or objects, and you want to apply some design patterns on top of that. This is not what those models can help you with, but they can help you with if you have some rather convoluted like if statements, they can be cleaned up nicely. So we've seen also those patterns. For documentation, ChatGPT is incredible. So like me, myself, I don't know about you, but like I prefer to write code than documentation, right? So writing docs, it takes long for me. It's like I struggle. With ChatGPT, what you can do, you can just write your thoughts, right? Like just bullet points. You don't have to worry about style because ChatGPT will take care of it, right? You can say, hey, I want this document to be concise and in good style. I want this document to have more flair or more emojis, and ChatGPT can help you with those documentation tasks. Debugging is another one where Just the other day, an engineer would told me that, hey, I have this failure from my like Java unit test. It's Mockito as well again. So what they did is they slapped the entire code of that test class and that error message they got to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT returned an answer, hey, you need to like fix your matchers, and that way they were able to pass that problem. Support is another thing. So many like interesting use cases within support case, right? I'm sure that you love, like everyone, debug CI failures, right? Because it's so easy. When CI fails, you have just one log, super cleanly, one error message, you know exactly what to do, right? Not. Usually when CI fails, it's just a bunch of logs and like bunch of errors. Some of them are like warnings pretending to be errors and so on. So to fix that, you can leverage also ChatGPT. We found some utility there as well. And when looking at the numbers this morning, 30% of monthly unique PR authors at Airbnb leverage Airbnb One Chat, which is our like internal chat that we use. And that internal chat is something that I want to talk to you now. We integrate with Azure OpenAI to provide that chat capability. This is the main way. There's like a web app. That's how like engineers interface with chat at Airbnb. A few things I want to unpack here. What we do, you see on the top, we have like two flavors of the chat. One is Glean Chat and the other one is One Chat. Glean Chat is more tailored for like 100% company like resources. Glean is a vendor. We use their search. We also use their chat. And this is highly useful. There's also One Chat, which I'll tell you what are the differences between those two because this is interesting. One Chat is our own layer on top of those Azure OpenAI APIs, where we can provide more configurability. Because, like in most cases, you might be used to let's say, OpenAI consumer product, where you type your message right to the chat and that's how you interface. But sometimes you want more configurability, right? You want to change the system message. You want to change a couple of other things. This is what One Chat gives us. And One Chat is our like internal name for our internal chat. When we are thinking about the future, our prediction is that Glean Chat will remain as something that is used for like more non-technical employees at Airbnb, versus like One Chat is going to be the main thing for developers, engineers, and like technical. And I'll explain those other things and bells and whistles that we can configure, and also the RAG feature, which is how we implemented the Airbnb Aware using some examples. So I'll get you through all of that. One important takeaway from this is that you need to provide internal chats to employees, because otherwise there will be workarounds. People will be using their personal accounts. There are risks of leaking PI and so on. We've seen that. It was all over the news in this year. So it is important to integrate safely with security measures, with policies, with making sure the privacy is adhered to those integrations. Let's talk about GPT input. This is very interesting, as hopefully you will be integrating with some of those language models. It's worth to distinguish the system message from the user message. And I'll show you examples in a little bit, but let's throw some theory first. So the system message is about the assistant or the system. What is their job, right? What do they know about? What are they supposed to do? What do they care about? And the system is supporting the user, right? And the user is whoever is interacting with chat. Usually, in our like typical case, it will be an engineer. An engineer wants to achieve something, like solve a problem or generate some code. Yeah. One thing about those different types of messages, and I'll show you examples, it's going to be clearer, is that as you will be thinking about integrating with that, you'll be dynamically constructing the user prompt and the system prompt in various ways to get much better results from the model. And I'll show you in a little bit how we do it. Our internal chat has settings, and you can configure the system message. A lot of employees or engineers would just keep the default system message, which is pretty much, hey, system, you're supposed to make employees productive, right? But there are like very interesting use cases where people are putting more context to the system message. For example, they would put more specific guidelines that are more Airbnb specific. They would put things like, certain specific financial information for final folks who leverage those models to generate reports and summarize reports. So there are like interesting use cases where you can play with that system message and see if this can drive better results from the model. About tokens and temperature, I'll talk a little bit later. Okay, let's talk about tokens now. Token is your unit of like word or text. It's important in the context of those large language models. This is how you get priced. You basically pay for tokens. Tokens go as inputs to those models and as outputs, more or less, because tokens are turned into vectors, of course. But understanding tokens is useful. So how many do you think tokens are there in the Declaration of the Independence, which is a fairly big document, let's say? Do you know? Everyone knows? C, D, A, B, B. It's actually A, so it's 1.6K. So the way tokenization is fairly efficient is roughly like 1.3 token per word. So you can actually stick quite a bit of content to those prompts, right? So here are a couple of examples of some like more famous novels. Like Little Prince is like fairly big, at least I remember it. So it would cost $1.3 to take it through the GPT-4 32K model, but it's doable. You can do it. And that cost is something that can quickly add up, right? As ChatGPT is used more and often by automated flows, integrated to your product, or by like engineers or employees interacting with this. So understanding this cost is very important because at the end of the day, we use those generative AIs to save employees' time, to save engineers' time, right? So we want to show that like the ROI is there. The cost we're paying for those interactions is paying off. Moving on a little bit, there is this beautiful page on GitHub. You can check it out. It has tons of information about like integrating with large language models. I'll talk about a few of those numbers. You can see some like simple hint on prompt engineering over there. By just saying be concise or use simple words, what you can reduce by quite a bit the number of output tokens that get like returned from the model. So that could save cost. Another example is the cost ratio between GPT-4 and GPT 3.5, which is very significant. It's like 50 times more expensive. At the same time, if you are prototyping, I'll recommend going for GPT-4 right off the bat because you want to have great results early with prototypes to prove the point, right? Also for coding tasks, I would go for GPT-4 as well as my default. But GPT 3.5 Turbo is not bad. It's super fast and it's for certain things actually works. I'm not going to go to all the details. Check out that page. It has tons of other like very useful information. Let's talk about retrieval augmented generation, which is like a fancy word of saying like add more context to the prompt to sort of trick the model into like knowing more than it normally knows. And this is how we have implemented in our internal one chat, the Airbnb aware feature. The way RAG works pretty much is like you need to find relevant context before you engage with the model and engineer your prompt to add that additional content to the prompt. And the best way to explain this is through an example, and I do have an example for you. But there's a lot of ways you can leverage it. Like if you're integrating with LLMs, usually you have ways to do it like in your organization, because usually you have an internal search that you can use to find relevant content and like slap it to and engineer that into prompts, okay? To give you an example how it works, so before RAG, OneBrain is like a piece of technology that we have at Airbnb. It doesn't matter what it is, I'm just using it as an example, okay? If you ask the model, hey, what is OneBrain? It's gonna pretty much hallucinate. They will make up an answer for this, right? But it's not true, it's made up. Like the model is trained on like generic like knowledge outside of Airbnb, has no idea about OneBrain and how it uses Airbnb, right? And that's like, so that sometimes those models can give you like plainly like false answer, like basically they will made up the answer. Sometimes the model can be slightly better and tell you, hey, I don't know anything about it. That happens as well. But the way to fix this problem and make the usage of chat internally within your organization way more powerful is to add more context. In this case, in this example, we're adding more context to the system prompt. So what we do first is that we run internal search. Search returns a bunch of documents and snippets. And then we take those snippets, that information that we gathered from the search into the system prompt. And instead of just saying, hey, system, you're helping employees to be more productive, we say, hey, system, you're helping employees to be productive, but those are some important things you should know about Airbnb and its context. And this gives much better results from the model. As you can see in this example, we have like a really good answer. Like it tells us exactly what OneBrain is, Python package, it has a command line interface, and so on. Another example, because this is like really powerful feature, is, hey, how to generate iOS project. This is something what an engineer could have asked. And without using RAG, what happens is you get a generic answer that you could have when you're working on open source projects and so on. It's not really useful at Airbnb, because at Airbnb, we have layers on top of like how you normally work. I'm sure you have something similar in your organizations. If we turn on Airbnb Aware, we've got a perfect answer, exactly what scripts needs to be ran, exact like links that you can follow up and get more information. So it's very useful. Moving on. Okay, shifting gears from ChatGPT, we covered that. Let's talk about GitHub Copilot. Game changer. Okay, question to you. Game changer, yes, no? No? Okay. Ooh, strong words. Kind of, maybe, a little bit. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. So this data comes from GitHub and Microsoft. So you can look them up from the blog. So it looks amazing, of course. We do see high potential there. There's a lot of engineers at Airbnb that find it like highly useful. There are some engineers who don't. There's just certain things, the way Copilot works, that doesn't really work with the way they work. That makes sense. But definitely there's some high potential there. Right, so I'll tell you how we approach Copilot. So first of all, how my team developer platform can best like leverage Copilot to improve developer productivity. And let's make an assumption that Copilot actually works well and like really improves productivity. We'll get there. The best thing we can do is to drive adoption, best practices, create a community that shares like tips and tricks and how to leverage Copilot. We also send this email to all the engineers who haven't tried Copilot yet, and we pester them to try it out. Another big thing that is useful to do if you are also integrating Copilot is making it enabled by default, right? If you control the IDEs and the plugins for the IDEs in your organization, make it so that Copilot is turned on by default, so that whoever is not really liking it, the experience, they can switch it off. But at least you reduce that barrier of entry that engineers by default have it enabled. Like at Airbnb, what we see today is like majority of like PR authors are leveraging Copilot one way or another. We want to see more. And there was a talk earlier today about some of the caveats of working with Copilot. One caveat is that some engineers feel that they're not really coding anymore. They're reviewing somebody else's code, right? And that code is sometimes not as good, right? So some people would say that it throws them off the flow if Copilot suggests code that doesn't compile. This is like really like weird experience, right? Copilot itself has at least improves and has a bunch of features to over time give you better and better suggestions. So I think over time is going to get better. But even today we see a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of people like loving the experience and like wanting to do more of that. One way to measure Copilot engagement is to see the number of accepted suggestions, okay? So there's some interesting nuance there. There's a few nuances here. One is that generally looking at, lines of code, probably not the best way to measure sort of efficiency or productivity. So that's just one nuance, so that's something to remember. Second thing is, what does it mean an accepted suggestion from Copilot, right? Because Copilot sometimes suggests something, and you accept that suggestion, so you have like this code generated for you, but then you need to fix things around that code, right? So is that suggestion accepted or not, since you had to fix it, right? Interestingly, Copilot has some logic inside the IDE plugin that after you finish like working on the body of code, they go back to that suggestion and they compare the code you have in the editor and the code that was suggested. and then they can assess whether the suggestion was actually accepted or not. So like Copilot has some heuristics around that to improve the telemetry around like the accept rate. But that's reasonably good. Like getting to this like 30% like accept rate, it should be helping developers to really reduce this especially working with boilerplate code or repetitive code, and focus more like on essential complexity, focus more on like more satisfying work. Yeah. And again, in this case, I'm showing you metrics for web only at Airbnb. It's because we have telemetry only for VS Code. So it's not all engineering, but it's for the web. So, but it still gives you some insight into like how it works and how it helps engineers. There's another project, Copilot Chat, which is slightly different thing than the vanilla GitHub Copilot. It's a brand new thing, part of this suite of product features from Copilot X. It's very new. It's getting there. We had some like mixed feedback, but we're seeing users trying it out. Some people actually love it. One very interesting thing about Copilot Chat is that it integrates the IDE with the chat interface right in the IDE, so the ergonomics are really good. Why is it important? Because like today, Airbnb engineers, when they work in the IDE and they want to engage with chat, they have to leave the IDE, go to the browser, like paste the code, interact with the model, get results back, copy-paste them back to the IntelliJ or VS Code or whatever IDE they use. So that experience is not great because they have to go back and forth. The copy-pasting is not really seamless. So Copilot just has this potential to like provide that seamless interface. It's not quite there yet, but like it's like should get there. $1 million question, right? Does it really like help with productivity? So we actually seeing like productivity improvements, and there are like a couple of caveats here. We chose like PR frequency as a way to like understand Copilot impact. And again, don't take it the wrong way. We're not looking at PR frequency as a measure of productivity of teams or individuals. Not at all. That's just not a way to go. But we needed to see quantify somehow, like, whether Copilot works and helps engineers. What we've learned is that engineers that adopted Copilot, they are more prolific when it comes to PRs, okay? But then we look at historical data, and what we found out, the same engineers, they are still more prolific anyway, right? But with Copilot, they're like even more prolific when it comes to PRs. So we found this like 5 percent points increase on like PR frequency right after like a Copilot launch, and like, which is interesting. And you might think like, okay, 5% is not that much or whatnot, but it is fairly significant. Like rarely you have like one product that you roll to your engineers, right? And then you see that like very clear increase on some dimension of productivity that you are looking at, right? So we want more products like that can really like move the needle on developer productivity. Moving on a little bit. Okay, my favorite category finally is when you are integrating with some like new idea, and I'll show you a couple of examples what we've done. So beyond chat, beyond Copilot, what can you do? So there are a couple of things that we made available at Airbnb so that it's easier to integrate with those large language models. One is that we built that like egress proxy that handles a couple of things that you normally would have to take care of. And it's a nice thing. It reduces the barrier of entry of like trying to innovate in that space and trying to figure out new ideas. Another thing is libraries or support in your favorite language, be it Python or Java or what else. We have examples for other languages as well. I'm just giving an example from Python where you can more easier integrate with those models for the use case that you're interested in. We also have a prototyping framework, and a lot of those things that I mentioned are not quite from my team developer platform. That's from like a data science platform team from like other teams. So I'm trying to cover the AI, helping not only engineers, but also like employees. So Sandcastle is another framework that we have that helps with those really quick prototypes where you can write 50 lines of Python and get some UI running, connected to LLMs to try some idea, to demonstrate some interesting new use case. So we want to have that prototyping culture. And because of the way we have integrated with Azure OpenAI is that we also make it safe. So that like, we encourage prototyping, but in a way that it's safe. It's like all the concerns around security and privacy are taken care of. Of course, one example here is that our internal chat that I showed earlier, one chat, was initially implemented as a sandcastle prototype and rolled out to all employees. And right after, we started working on making it like a proper application, use the frameworks that we use for like long-term maintained applications, right? But initial internal chat was using this framework. This is an example of application of generative AIs with code review. A very interesting example. A few months ago, we did this hackathon project. In a couple of days, we were able to get this AI reviewer to any pull request. And this is actually rolled out. We have it at Airbnb that like you could tag AI reviewer in your PR description and you get that automated code review from ChatGPT. Very interesting. This code review is like, sometimes it does like really good job. Sometimes it's like a, just better linter, if you may. But it's definitely an interesting area where we could leverage those generative AIs to help with like things like reviewing code, for example, right? And let's zoom into more details how we integrated that. So this is how we engineer the user prompt. Basically, we put the PR title, PR description, and the div into the user prompt, and then, hey, please like help us review the code. For the system prompt, what we do, it's not as dynamic system prompt. I did make an experiment with the system prompt. I'll tell you a little bit. But right now, our system prompt for this use case is fairly static. But there are interesting things we have tweaked there. For example, we explained the system that you don't supposed to be nitpicky, for example, right? Your job is not to find as many problems in the code as possible, right? And also, like if the PR looks good, just say looks good to me and move on, right? Because we want to avoid this cycle where an engineer updates the PR based on the suggestion from the AI, pushes those commits, right? And they get another review from AI that, hey, and you have a bunch of those other things to fix, right? And it's basically like a never-ending, like vicious cycle. So we want to avoid that. Some of the interesting things I want to call out is, for example, we use simple things like triple quotes for the dynamic content. This is also like important as you are engineering those prompts to make it to increase the quality of the output you get from those models, right? Another thing that I want to mention here is that because we put entire PR description into the user prompt, it opens up the very interesting configurability. Basically, in the PR message, you can tell the model, the system, to do something extra. For example, you can say, AI reviewer, can you double check for like security vulnerabilities in this code, right? Or AI reviewer, can you suggest improvements to the markdown documentation that I have included in that PR, right? So you can do things like that and actually model response to that. And like in the code review comments, you will have according answers, which is very interesting. One thing that I want to flag here, because when we did it, it makes me think about what Copilot Explorer does. So Copilot Explorer is this open source, I guess, project initiative or like page on GitHub where an engineer reversed engineered the Copilot plugin to understand exactly how Copilot works, right? Like, how is it so that Copilot can actually predict what I'm thinking and provide me like useful suggestions? I really encourage, like if you're working with those LLMs, I really encourage you to read this because it's like such a fascinating read what like Copilot does. Like the way, for example, they look at what are the tabs you have open, right? So the tabs you are open in Copilot are like part of the like prompt. They look at what are the most recent edited files or viewed files. I don't remember the exact details, but there are a lot of like interesting like tidbits of or like prompt hacks that are like super interesting from the standpoint of like, hey, if you're integrating with those LLMs, you want to also like know those tricks and learn and share. Okay, almost last slide, so I promise. So One last thing I want to mention also with that review GPT, what we have done is we can also like do something around like cost management, because per token, looking at the pricing per token, and you can look them up. This is like public information. Like GPT 32K is twice more expensive than the 8K model. So what we do with Review GPT at Airbnb is that if the diff is large, we're going to put it through the large model. If the diff is like regular or small enough and it fits the smaller model, it goes to the smaller model. So it's a simple thing you can do to reduce the cost. On average, what it means for us is that the large diffs cost like 70 cents on average to review with this AI, and the small diff would cost like 10 cents to review by AI. So it's interesting. Again, don't make it the wrong way. It's not that like the large model is 7 times more expensive. It's like twice more expensive. But on average, this is how it turns out at Airbnb. It's because like, you pay for token. Finally, this is very interesting space. We should do more around that. We should like talk more, organize ourselves into groups, figure it out, share best practices and new creative ideas how to leverage generative AIs. So that's what I want to leave you with, and wanted to share with you like our journey. And we are also like starting there. Like it's not that we have figured everything out. Like if I did this presentation a week ago, my slides would be different. We didn't have like Lean Chat yet. We didn't have like the Airbnb aware Retrieval augmented generation yet. So this is rapidly moving, but it's insanely interesting. And it does have this great opportunity to really like move the needle on developer productivity. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.